My name is Wren Calloway and I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, my younger sister stood in the lobby of the Alderton Children's Museum in Columbus, Ohio, in front of a bronze plaque that had just been unveiled, and accepted credit for an exhibit that took me 11 years to build. The plaque had her name on it. It had the foundation's name on it. It had a dedication date of April 19th. What it did not have was mine. She stood there in a cream blazer with her hair pinned back, shaking hands with the museum director, the board chair, and a city councilwoman who had flown in from the 3rd District specifically for the occasion. There were 47 people in that lobby. A photographer from the Columbus Dispatch was kneeling on one knee to get the angle right. My sister smiled the way she always smiled. Wide, practiced, the kind of smile that fills a room and leaves no space for questions. But here is what she did not know. 11 years of correspondence, grant applications, design revisions, donor letters, and one handwritten note from a woman named Estelle Briggs were sitting in a cedar box in the trunk of my car in the parking garage 2 floors below. I had not brought that box to make a scene. I had brought it because Estelle had told me once that the truth does not need to be loud. It just needs to be present. Before I tell you what happened in that lobby, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps more people find these stories, and I genuinely mean that. Drop your city and the time it is where you are right now in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning of this, to a kitchen in Granville, Ohio, and a woman with flour on her apron who told me something I have carried in my chest for 22 years. I grew up in Granville, Ohio, which is the kind of small town that looks like a postcard and feels like a pressure cooker if you are the wrong kind of child inside it. Population under 6,000. One main street with white clapboard storefronts. A college in the center of town that made the whole place smell like ambition in September and disappointment in May. My father, Dennis Calloway, taught high school history at Granville High for 26 years. He was patient, methodical, and almost entirely absent from the business of raising us. Not unkind, just elsewhere. My mother, Patricia, ran the house, the social calendar, and the unspoken economy of which daughter got what. My sister Becca was 3 years younger and everything our mother had been before she married my father and moved to a small town and decided that was enough. Becca was loud in the right rooms, pretty in the way that made adults say things like she is going to be something, and magnetic in the particular way that drew attention without appearing to seek it. She was not cruel to me when we were children. She was something harder to name than cruel. She was simply the one the room turned toward, and I was the one who stayed at the edge of it. I was the quiet one. The one who drew in the margins of her notebooks and spent Saturday afternoons at the Granville Public Library reading about architecture and natural history and the way museums in New York arranged light to fall on objects so that ordinary things became sacred. I was the one who asked for a sketchbook for Christmas and got a diary instead because Mom thought drawing was a hobby and writing was a skill. Becca asked for a camera and got the camera. A real one, 35mm, with a leather case. I do not say any of this with bitterness anymore. I say it because you need to understand the architecture of a family before you can understand how something built inside one gets stolen. The woman who saw me was not my mother. She was Estelle Briggs, who lived 4 blocks from our house in a Victorian on Plum Street with a wraparound porch and a garden that was organized in a way that felt intentional rather than decorative. Estelle was 71 when I was 12. She had been a museum educator at the Ohio History Center in Columbus for 31 years before she retired. She had never married. She had a nephew in Cincinnati who called twice a year and a cat named Leonard who sat in the front window and watched the street with the expression of someone who had seen everything and was no longer impressed. I started going to Estelle's house because she had the best yard sale in the neighborhood every spring, and I had $3 saved from birthday money and a specific interest in old things. The first time I knocked on her door to ask if the brass compass on the card table was for sale, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Why do you want it? Not how much will you pay, not it's $1.50. Why do you want it?" I told her I thought it was beautiful and that I wanted to draw it. She said, "Come inside and I'll show you where it came from." That was the beginning of 11 years of Saturday afternoons. Estelle's house was full of objects with histories. A surveyor's transit from 1887. A collection of botanical prints from a woman who had walked the Appalachians in 1912 and pressed every specimen she found. A child's tin lunch pail from a coal mining town in West Virginia that Estelle had acquired from an estate sale and catalogued by hand in a green notebook. She did not collect things for their monetary value. She collected them because every object, she told me, is a piece of someone's attention. Someone made this. Someone used this. Someone thought this was worth keeping. And if nobody tells that story, the object becomes mute. She taught me how to research provenance. How to write an interpretive label, not the dry kind that says what an object is, but the kind that makes a person stop walking and actually look. She taught me about sightlines and how a museum exhibit is a kind of sentence, with a beginning and a middle and an end, and how the visitor's body moves through it the way a reader's eye moves through a paragraph. I was 16 when she said the thing I have carried ever since. We were in her back room, reorganizing a collection of hand-stitched quilts she had acquired from an estate in Coshocton County, and I had just finished writing a 2-page interpretive narrative for a 9-patch quilt made by a woman named Clara Hess in 1903. Estelle read it slowly, then set it down on the table and looked at me. She said, "Wren, the work you do is the kind that holds things together after the people who made them are gone. That is not a small thing. Don't let anyone make it small." I was 16. I wrote it in the back of my sketchbook in pencil and I have not forgotten a single word. I went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and a federal loan. Becca went to Ohio State 2 years later on a full merit scholarship that my mother announced at dinner with the kind of pride she had never once applied to my partial scholarship. I do not blame my mother for being proud of Becca. I blame her for not understanding that pride is not a finite resource, and that spending it on one daughter does not require withholding it from another. I studied museum studies and art history. I graduated in 3 years and 8 months because I was working 22 hours a week at the campus library and I wanted to get out of debt faster. My thesis was on participatory exhibit design. The idea that a museum exhibit is most powerful when the visitor becomes part of the story rather than just a witness to it. My advisor, A soft-spoken woman named Dr. Adiz Okafor told me it was the strongest undergraduate thesis she had read in 7 years. I did not tell my mother what Dr. Okafor said. I had learned by then that achievements I shared at home had a way of being received politely and then redirected. Oh, that's wonderful. Did you hear that Becca got the internship at the television station? I moved to Columbus after graduation. I rented a studio apartment above a dry cleaner on North High Street. The smell of cleaning solvent came through the floor vents every morning, and I told myself it smelled like forward motion. I got a job as an exhibit assistant at the Alderton Children's Museum, a mid-sized institution in the short north neighborhood that had been underperforming for years and was in the middle of a strategic planning process that everyone described as a pivot and nobody could define. The Alderton was not a prestigious institution. It was the kind of museum that had good bones and bad lighting and a donor base that had not been meaningfully cultivated in a decade. But it had something that mattered to me. It had a director named Carla Huang who had been trying for 3 years to get funding for a permanent exhibit on Ohio's natural and cultural history. Something that would anchor the museum's identity and give it a reason for school groups to come back year after year. I had been there 4 months when I went to Carla's office with a 40-page proposal I had written on my own time. I had sketched the layout by hand on graph paper. I had drafted interpretive labels for 14 objects. I had researched 3 potential anchor donors and written a 1-page brief on each. I had titled the exhibit "The Things We Kept: Ohio Stories and Objects." Carla read all 40 pages while I sat in the chair across from her desk. She did not speak for 11 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "How long did this take you?" I said about 4 months of evenings and weekends. She said, "I want to move forward with this. I want you to lead it." I was 23 years old. I had been at the museum for 4 months. I said yes before she finished the sentence. What followed was 8 years of the most consuming, most meaningful work I have ever done. The exhibit grew from a 40-page proposal into a full permanent installation that eventually occupied 4,000 square feet of the museum's east wing. I spent those years writing grants, managing a rotating cast of volunteer archivists, negotiating loans of objects from private collections and county historical societies, designing the interpretive framework, training docents, and rebuilding the museum's relationship with the community organizations that had drifted away from it. I also drove back to Granville on Sunday afternoons to sit with Estelle, whose health had begun to decline in my second year at the Alderton. She had been diagnosed with a degenerative condition that affected her mobility first and her energy second, and by the time I was 25, she was spending most of her days in the chair by the front window with Leonard on her lap and her green notebooks on the side table. I would bring her coffee and sit on the footstool and tell her about the exhibit. She would ask questions that were better than any feedback I received at the museum. Not is it beautiful, but does it make the visitor feel responsible? Not is it comprehensive, but does it know what to leave out? The last time I saw her lucid was in October, 2 years before the plaque unveiling. She was 83. I had driven up on a Sunday afternoon and she was having a clear day, which had become rarer. She held my hand and said, "The exhibit is yours, Wren. Make sure it stays that way." I thought she was being sentimental. I squeezed her hand and said it would be fine. She died in February, 14 months before the plaque went up. Her nephew in Cincinnati handled the estate. 3 weeks after the funeral, a woman from her attorney's office called me and said that Estelle had left me something. I drove to Granville on a Tuesday morning and sat in a small office above a hardware store on Main Street and was handed a cedar box with a brass latch. Inside was a letter in Estelle's handwriting, dated 18 months before her death, along with 37 years of her professional correspondence, her green cataloging notebooks, and a single document on her attorney's letterhead that I did not fully understand until I showed it to a lawyer of my own. I will tell you what was in that letter and what that document said. But first I need to tell you what happened with Becca, because that is the part of this story that the cedar box was built to answer. Becca had moved to Columbus 4 years after I did. She had worked in television production for a while, then in marketing, then in nonprofit communications, which is where she landed and where she discovered that she was very good at the part of nonprofit work that involves being in rooms with donors and board members and city officials. She was not good at the operational side. She was not interested in the operational side. But she understood, with an instinct I had always known she possessed, how to make herself the face of something. She joined the Alderton's communications staff in my 6th year there. I did not ask for this. I did not oppose it. Carla had hired her because the museum needed someone who could manage media relationships and donor events, and Becca was genuinely skilled at both. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself that the exhibit was mine in every way that mattered. The intellectual architecture, the donor relationships I had built over years, the community trust that had taken a decade to earn, and that Becca's presence in the communications department did not change any of that. I was wrong. Not immediately. Not obviously. But gradually, in the way that water changes the shape of stone. It started with small things. Becca began attending donor meetings that had previously been mine to run. Carla explained that having a communications person in the room improved donor relations, and that was true enough that I did not push back. Becca started giving quotes to the Columbus Dispatch about the exhibit. Again, this was her job, and the quotes were accurate enough. She started being photographed at exhibit events, standing in front of the panels I had written, beside the objects I had sourced, in the space I had designed. Then, in my 8th year, Carla announced that the museum had received a $2.3 million capital gift from the Hargrove Family Foundation to make the things we kept a permanent installation with a dedicated endowment. This was the largest single gift in the museum's history. It had come through a relationship I had spent 3 years cultivating with the foundation's program director, a meticulous woman named Sandra Hargrove, who had told me explicitly that she was funding the exhibit because of the community engagement model I had built into its design. The gift announcement was a significant moment. There was a press release, a reception, a ceremony planned for April 19th of the following year, at which a bronze plaque would be installed in the lobby acknowledging the gift and the exhibit's leadership. I was not told about the plaque until 6 weeks before the ceremony. Carla called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon in early March. She was wearing her careful expression, the one she used when she was about to say something she had already decided and did not want to debate. She told me the foundation had requested that the plaque acknowledge the exhibit's public-facing leadership. She told me the board had agreed that Becca's name would appear on the plaque as exhibit director. She told me my contributions were deeply valued and would be recognized in the program materials for the ceremony. I sat in that chair for 4 seconds before I spoke. I counted them. I said, Becca has been on staff for 4 years. The exhibit proposal was written 8 years ago. The donor relationship with the Hargrove Foundation was mine from the first meeting. What is the basis for this decision? Carla said the board felt that the public-facing role was the appropriate criterion for the plaque. She said it was not a reflection of my contributions. She said program materials would make my role clear. I said, I would like to see the board minutes from the meeting where this was decided. Carla said she would look into it. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat at my desk for 7 minutes without moving. My hands were flat on the surface of the desk. They did not shake. I noticed that. I did not cry. I did not call Becca. I did not send an email. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, took out the cedar box I had brought from my car that morning because I had had a feeling, and I opened the letter Estelle had written me. I want to tell you about this letter carefully because it is the center of everything. Estelle had written it by hand on her personal stationery, cream paper, her initials at the top in navy ink. It was 4 pages long. The first 2 pages were personal, memories of our Saturday afternoons, things she had observed in me that she wanted me to know she had seen. The 3rd page was specific. She wrote that she had watched my career from a distance and had been following the development of the things we kept through the articles I sent her and the conversations we had on Sunday afternoons. She wrote that she had spoken with her attorney and had prepared a sworn affidavit documenting the intellectual origin of the exhibit, based on the 40-page proposal I had sent her in my first year at the Alderton, a copy of which she had kept in her files, and based on our correspondence over 8 years, which she had retained in full. She wrote, I have watched people take credit for quiet work before, Wren. It is one of the oldest injustices there is. I am leaving you the documentation to prevent it. Use it when you need it. You will know when. The 4th page was a list. 31 items, each one dated, each one a piece of correspondence or a document she had retained that established the timeline of the exhibit's development. The original proposal. 17 emails I had sent her over 8 years describing the exhibit's evolution. For grant applications I had forwarded to her for feedback, with her handwritten notes in the margins. A letter I had written her when the Hargrove Foundation made their first site visit, describing the meeting in detail and naming Sandra Hargrove by name. The document on her attorney's letterhead was the sworn affidavit. Notarized. Dated. Signed by Estelle and witnessed by 2 members of her attorney's staff. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I put it back in the cedar box, closed the brass latch, and picked up my phone to call a lawyer. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think some of you watching this know exactly what this moment feels like. Not the cedar box specifically, but the moment when you realize that someone has been quietly building a case against you, and that the only thing standing between you and erasure is the documentation you kept without knowing you would need it. If you have ever done work that someone else took credit for, at a job, in a family, in a community, drop the word "seen" in the comments right now. I read every comment and I want to know how many of you have been here. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. These stories take a long time to tell and I want to keep telling them. Now, back to the story. The lawyer I called was a woman named Patricia Osei, no relation to my former advisor, though I thought of her when I made the appointment, who specialized in employment and intellectual property matters. I met with her on a Tuesday morning in late March, 3 weeks before the ceremony. I brought the cedar box. I brought my original 40-page proposal with my name and the date on the cover page. I brought 8 years of grant applications with my name as principal investigator. I brought the donor correspondence with Sandra Hargrove, which I had retained in my own files. I brought the employment records showing my title and responsibilities for every year of the exhibit's development. Patricia Osei read through everything for 40 minutes while I sat across from her and drank a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Then she looked up and said, "This is a very clean record." She said the affidavit from Estelle was particularly significant because it had been prepared before any dispute arose, which meant it could not be characterized as a self-serving document. She said I had grounds to formally contest the plaque attribution and, if necessary, to bring a claim for misappropriation of intellectual property against the museum and the board. I told her I did not want to sue the museum. I had spent 8 years building something there. I did not want to tear it down. She said, "Then what do you want?" I thought about it for a moment. I said I wanted my name on the plaque. I wanted the record corrected before April 19th. And I wanted Sandra Hargrove to know the truth, because Sandra Hargrove had given $2.3 million based on a relationship with me, and she deserved to know that the person she had built that relationship with was being erased from the acknowledgement. Patricia said she would draft a letter to the board. She said it would be measured, factual, and accompanied by a document index. She said we would give the board 14 days to respond before we escalated. The letter went out on a Thursday. It was 6 pages long. The document index had 31 items, numbered, dated, and described in 1 sentence each. The letter asked for 3 things: a correction to the plaque attribution, a formal acknowledgement in writing of my role as the exhibit's originating designer and principal developer, and a meeting with the board chair before the ceremony. I did not tell Becca the letter had been sent. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell anyone at the museum except Carla, who received a copy and called me within an hour of receiving it. Her voice was careful. She said she needed to discuss this with the board. I said I understood and that I was available for a meeting at their convenience. The board chair called me 4 days later. His name was Gerald Ashworth, a retired attorney in his late 60s who had been on the Alderton's board for 12 years. He was not warm on the phone, but he was precise, and I respected that. He said the board had reviewed the letter and the document index. He said they were taking the matter seriously. He asked if I would be willing to meet in person before any decisions were made. I said yes. The meeting was on a Monday morning, 10 days before the ceremony. Gerald Ashworth, 2 other board members, Carla, and the museum's in-house counsel. I brought Patricia Osei. I brought the cedar box. I brought a second binder I had assembled over the previous 2 weeks, a chronological record of the exhibit's development, organized by year, with tab dividers and a table of contents. 43 items. Every grant application, every donor letter, every design revision, every docent training document, with my name on each one. I set the binder on the conference table and did not open it immediately. I let it sit there. Gerald Ashworth opened the meeting by saying the board recognized that the plaque attribution had been handled without sufficient process and that they wanted to understand the full picture before April 19th. He asked me to walk them through my role in the exhibit's development. I did. I spoke for 22 minutes without notes, because I did not need notes. I knew the exhibit the way you know something you built with your own hands. I described the original proposal, the 8 years of grant writing, the community partnerships, the donor relationship with the Hargrove Foundation from the first phone call to the site visit to the gift announcement. I described Estelle Briggs and what she had taught me and what she had left me. I opened the cedar box and placed the notarized affidavit on the table. The museum's in-house counsel picked it up and read it. He set it down and looked at Gerald Ashworth. I said, I am not asking the board to diminish my sister's contributions to the museum's communications work. I am asking the board to accurately represent the history of this exhibit on a permanent public installation. The plaque will be there for decades. The record should be correct. The room was quiet for a moment. Gerald Ashworth looked at the binder on the table. Then he looked at me. He said, Ms. Calloway, I owe you an apology on behalf of this board. This process was mishandled. I did not say it was fine. I said, I appreciate that. Now I need to tell you about the morning of April 19th, because that is where this story turns. The ceremony was scheduled for 11 o'clock. I arrived at the museum at 9:15 and parked in the garage below the building. I sat in my car for a few minutes with the cedar box on the passenger seat. The box was not going inside. I had decided that the night before. Everything that needed to be decided had already been decided. The box had done its work. I left it in the car and walked into the building. The lobby was being set up. 47 folding chairs arranged in rows. A podium near the east wall. The plaque covered in a dark green velvet cloth. A photographer from the Columbus Dispatch adjusting his equipment near the window. Museum staff moving quietly with coffee cups and clipboards. Becca arrived at 9:50 in the cream blazer. She looked composed and prepared, the way she always looked in professional settings. She saw me near the coffee table and came over. She said, I heard you met with the board. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes were not. I said, I did. She said, Wren, I want you to know that I never asked for my name to be on the plaque. That was Carla's decision. I didn't know until. I said, I know. She stopped. I said, I believe you didn't ask for it. I also know you didn't correct it when you found out. Those are two different things. She didn't answer. She looked at the velvet cloth over the plaque. She looked at the photographer setting up his tripod. She looked back at me. For a moment, something crossed her face that I had not seen there in a very long time. Not guilt exactly. Something quieter. Recognition. The ceremony began at 11. Gerald Ashworth spoke first. He thanked the Hargrove Foundation and welcomed Sandra Hargrove, who was seated in the front row in a gray wool coat. He acknowledged the museum's staff. Then he said something I had not known he was going to say. He said, "Before we unveil this plaque, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the exhibit you are about to see formally dedicated was conceived, designed, and built over 8 years by one person, whose vision and persistence made everything that followed possible. The Things We Kept exists because of Wren Calloway." 47 people in the lobby. The photographers shudder. Sandra Hargrove turning in her seat to find my face. My mother, who had driven up from Granville and was sitting in the 4th row in her good coat, going very still. Gerald stepped aside. A museum staff member removed the velvet cloth. The plaque read, "The Things We Kept, Ohio Stories and Objects Conceived and Developed by Wren Calloway Made Permanent Through the Generosity of the Hargrove Family Foundation, April 19th. My name. In bronze. Permanent." I did not cry. I stood in the 3rd row with my hands at my sides and I looked at the plaque and I thought about Estelle in her chair by the window with Leonard on her lap, asking me if the exhibit made the visitor feel responsible. I thought about a 16-year-old girl in a back room in Granville writing something down in pencil because she did not want to forget it. I thought she would have liked this. After the ceremony, Sandra Hargrove crossed the lobby and found me near the east wall. She was a precise woman in her late 50s, not given to sentiment, which is part of why I had always respected her. She shook my hand and held it for a moment. She said, "I knew something was off when I saw the original press release. I called Gerald the week before the ceremony." She paused. "I'm glad it was corrected." I said, "Thank you for paying attention." She said, "That's what donors are for." I want to pause here one more time, because I think what Sandra said is worth sitting with. She said that's what donors are for. She meant that the people who invest in something, with money, with time, with trust, have a responsibility to make sure the thing they invested in is honestly represented. She had given $2.3 million based on a relationship with me, and when the record didn't match the reality, she noticed. She made a call. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected directions. Sometimes the person who corrects the record is not the one who was wronged. Sometimes it is someone who simply paid close enough attention. If you have ever had someone pay attention when you needed it most, a teacher, a neighbor, a colleague, a stranger who noticed something was wrong, type the word witness in the comments. I want to know. And please subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story I have to tell is one I think a lot of you will recognize. The aftermath of April 19th was quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic confrontation with Becca. There was no screaming in a parking lot. The consequences moved the way consequences usually move when the record is corrected. Slowly, through the channels that matter. The Columbus Dispatch ran a piece on the exhibit's permanent installation. The reporter had done her homework. The piece described me as the exhibit's originating designer and lead developer. It mentioned the Hargrove gift. It mentioned Estelle Briggs by name, which I had asked the reporter to include because Estelle deserved to be in the record too. The piece ran on a Sunday, which is when people actually read the paper. Becca left the Alderton 4 months later. She told people it was a career move, and maybe it was. She took a communications role at a larger non-profit on the other side of the city. I do not know if she left because of the ceremony or because of something else entirely. I did not ask. We have not spoken since April, not because I am punishing her, but because I have not yet found words for what I want to say that are honest and kind at the same time, and I refuse to say something that is only one of those things. My mother called me the evening of the ceremony. She had driven back to Granville by then. She said, "I didn't know, Wren, about any of it. I want you to know that." Her voice was careful in the way it gets when she is trying to say something real and is not sure she knows how. I said I believed her. I did. My mother is not a calculating person. She is a person who turned toward the light in the room without noticing who she was standing on. That is its own kind of damage, but it is not malice. She said, "I'm proud of you." 2 seconds of silence. Then, I should have said that more. I held the phone and looked out my apartment window at the street below. I said, "Yes. You should have." She didn't argue. That was something. My father sent a card. A physical card, handwritten, mailed from Granville. It arrived 4 days after the ceremony. He wrote 3 sentences. He said he had read the dispatch piece. He said the exhibit sounded like something worth seeing. He said he hoped I knew that he had always thought I was capable of something like this, even when he hadn't said so. I read the card 3 times. Then I put it in the cedar box, next to Estelle's letter, next to the notarized affidavit, next to 31 years of a woman's careful attention to the things that other people overlooked. I still have the cedar box. It sits on my bookshelf now, not in a drawer. I do not keep it because I am waiting for the next fight. I keep it because it is a record of 2 things at once: what was almost taken from me, and what was given to me by a woman who saw me clearly for 22 years and made sure the record would survive her. Carla Huang retired from the Alderton last year. At her retirement dinner, she said something to me privately that I have thought about since. She said, "I made a mistake with the plaque. I want you to know I knew it was a mistake when I made it, and I made it anyway, and I am sorry for that." She did not offer an explanation. She just said she was sorry, directly, without qualification. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "You built something real, Wren. Don't let anyone make it small." I recognized those words. They were Estelle's words, 22 years later, in a different mouth. I thought about how the things we say to people travel forward through time in ways we cannot predict. How a woman in a Victorian house on Plum Street with flour on her hands and a cat named Leonard could put words into the world that would reach me again at a retirement dinner 3 states away from where she said them. That is what the exhibit was always about, really. Not the objects. The continuity. The way attention passed from one person to the next, the way someone's careful keeping of a thing, a quilt, a letter, a compass, a green notebook, made it possible for someone else to understand where they came from and what they were part of. The things we kept is still open. I still work at the Alderton, though my title changed 2 years ago to Chief of Exhibits and Programs. The East Wing gets 12,000 visitors a year, about 40% of them school groups. I still write the interpretive labels myself, even though I have a staff of 4 now. I cannot let go of that part. The labels are where the story lives. Last spring, a girl came into the museum on a school field trip. She was maybe 12 years old, wearing a purple backpack and an expression of mild boredom that I recognized immediately. She stopped in front of a case containing a hand-stitched quilt from Coshocton County, 1903, made by a woman named Clara Hess. She read the label. Then she read it again. Then she turned to the docent and asked who wrote the words on the sign. The docent said the museum's exhibit director wrote them. The girl looked at the label for another moment. Then she took a small notebook out of her backpack and wrote something down. I was standing 15 feet away. I did not say anything. I did not need to. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, if you have done work that someone else took credit for, if you have been the quiet one in a room that turned towards someone louder, if you have been the person at the edge of the family photograph, I want you to know something. The work is real whether or not the plaque has your name on it. The record exists whether or not anyone is reading it. And there is almost always someone, somewhere, who has been paying attention. Who kept the letters? Who retained the correspondence? Who wrote a notarized affidavit because they saw what was coming before you did? You are not invisible. You are just working in a room where the light hasn't been arranged correctly yet. Estelle Briggs taught me that the way a museum exhibit is built is the way all meaning is built. Slowly, carefully, with attention to what to include and what to leave out, and with the understanding that the visitor's experience of it depends entirely on whether the person who built it told the truth. Tell the truth. Keep the records. Trust that the light will eventually fall on what is real. And if you have someone in your life who sees you the way Estelle saw me, a teacher, a neighbor, a grandmother, an aunt, anyone who told you once that your work was the kind that holds things together, call them. Write to them. Tell them what their attention meant. Do not wait until you are sitting in a lawyer's office with a cedar box and a notarized affidavit to understand what they gave you. I wish I had told Estelle more clearly what she meant to me. I think she knew. But I wish I had said it out loud, more than once, in words she could have kept. Drop a comment and tell me about someone who saw you when you needed it. I read every single one, and I mean that. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it today. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.